Welcome back to another Crypto Daily 3 at 3. All right, what's going on, guys? It is Wednesday, October 2nd, and we have kind of a political kind of themed 3 at 3 today. So first we're going to talk about Libra and some new information and or FUD, depending on your perspective, about its membership base of the Libra Association. Second, we're going to talk about new advocates for cryptocurrency on both the national and state level. And then third, we're going to talk about Bitcoin in Hong Kong amid ongoing protests. So let's start with Libra. Continues to be the story defining the time in a lot of ways. So yesterday, there was another report from the Wall Street Journal with more detail about something that we've been hearing for a while, which is that key members of the Libra Association are either A, not as committed as they perhaps seemed when Facebook presented them and announced the whole thing, or B, that they're reconsidering their commitment now in the light of pressure from governments around the world. So not a ton of details given in the Wall Street Journal piece, but basically you can see here Visa, MasterCard, and other financial partners that signed on to build and maintain the Libra payments network are reconsidering their involvement following a backlash from US and European government officials. Major defections could imperil Libra, Facebook's attempt to persuade consumers to swap their national currencies for a digital coin that could be used to pay for goods and services on the internet. By the way, that's an interesting phrasing. I think that Facebook would bristle at that, as they're trying to be very clear that it's not swapping Libra for other currencies. At least that's what they're trying to say. So on and so forth, right? So basically, the key thing here is that the Libra Association is a centerpiece of its argument for why Facebook's argument for why it should be allowed to do this. One, from the standpoint of the quality, caliber, and global pedigree of the companies involved. Two, from the idea that it is truly decentralized and outside of Facebook's control. And so when there's indications that their coalition is less strong, it becomes less politically risky, costly, whatever, to oppose Libra, right? So David Marcus, the head of Calibra at Facebook, basically took to Twitter to address this. He says, felt like addressing this. One, official first wave of Libra Association members will be formalized in the weeks to come. Two, change of this magnitude is hard and requires courage, and it will be a long journey. For Libra to succeed, it needs committed members. And while I have no knowledge of specific organizations' plans to not step up, commitment to the mission is more important than anything else. Three, the part of this article suggesting we weren't on top of or didn't share detailed information about how to secure Libra and protect the network against illegal activity is categorically untrue and worth calling BS. Four, the tone of this reporting suggests angst, etc. I can tell you that we're very calmly and confidently working through the legitimate concerns that Libra has raised by bringing conversations about the value of digital currencies to the forefront. So a couple of things that are interesting about this. One is this reads to me like a pre-preparation for, in fact, some of the members that we thought were going to be part of the association not ultimately actually deciding to join. That's kind of my read on the first two, which is fine. And he's saying that it's about the mission and you have to be committed to the mission, which is both true but also PR spin. So that is what it is. On this latter point, though, that Facebook is freaking out about that, I don't buy that for a second. I think that they're a smart enough group to have anticipated the type of blowback that they're getting and the type of frustration. And even in the leaked transcript of Zuckerberg's conversation that's been blowing up the news as well, I think it was from a Verge published this transcript from an internal Facebook meeting. He talked about Libra, and he doesn't give a lot of that concern, right? It doesn't seem distressing. And so, he says here, part of what we're trying to do overall in this big projects now that touch very socially important aspects of society is have a more consultative approach. Clearly, I mean, we've talked about it here on the 3 at 3 before, right? Facebook they know that the stakes are so high with this that they have to be engaged with regulators, with, everyone, all the stakeholders involved from the get-go. This can't be the sort of move fast and break things model that just worked worked for them in the past. Now, it may even be ultimately that we see that to some extent this is a sacrificial lamb and gives something for regulators to say no to that Facebook can stomach versus more overarching regulation, dismantling, etc., a la the Elizabeth Warren plan. But who knows? So I guess the interesting thing is, one, just the specifics of Libra. Obviously, the actual substance of this this project itself is fascinating and has huge implications for the world. Two, the larger context of just the continued conversation about stable coins and central bank digital currencies, and who are the right people to actually make this new type of digital money, right? So the IMF published a blog post last week about central bank digital currencies, just showing kind of that the highest order eyes from the traditional financial world are looking at it. And then there was a really interesting op-ed from Tyler Cowen today, Marginal Revolution, on Bloomberg Opinion, that basically gave a reason that's very different than what some of us who are concerned with central bank digital currencies are thinking about. So I think a lot of people in the crypto community look at CBDCs and are stressed out on the basis of the idea of the surveillance that they offer, right? The ability for governments to monitor the financial activity of citizens. Tyler Cowen is arguing basically for a different reason, which is that it disrupts the delicate balance between state power and private power, right? So he says, he basically uses China as the example. So he says, consider China, which is perhaps the furthest along of any government in this field with its plan for a digital yuan. The Chinese banking and payment system is already so state-run and state-controlled, so this will prove one of the easier transitions. That China is in the lead here should give you pause. Most banking and financial systems are an uneasy blend of centralized and decentralized elements, with the balance changing as technologies evolve. If countries institute central bank digital currencies, it will in effect be an end run around the private sector. Too much commercial activity will be subject to centralized regulatory control. So the fascinating tension here, and I'll leave on this, is that on the one hand, you have folks like Tyler Cowen who are arguing that if central banks create the digital currencies of the future, it will be an end run around the private sector, that it'll be too much power shifted over into the hands of the state. Whereas, on the other hand, there's these private actors like Facebook and Libra that would really shift the balance of power over to the private sector in a kind of undeniable way. And that's at the center of the tension of what should and shouldn't be allowed, which again is just one of the reasons that Bitcoin is so fascinating, sitting in the middle, where it's not private power per se, it's not government power per se, it's this new network actor that's everything and no one and everywhere and nowhere all at once. So really fascinating stuff. Again, to me, just continues to be the story of the year, and potentially bigger. But with that, let's move on to number 2. So, new crypto advocates. A couple of interesting stories keeping on this theme of the relationship of crypto to politics. First is a new crypto-friendly congressional candidate. This one in the 12th District of California, which is the Nancy Pelosi's district. So it includes San Francisco. So Agatha Basilar is a 27-year-old Brazilian-American immigrant who is running on a left liberal platform and is interested in cryptocurrencies as a mechanism to redistribute power to people and away from traditional tech actors. So in a lot of ways, the statements that she's had kind of read a little bit like, the tech crypto argument that folks like the Andreessen Horowitz people, Chris Dixon, have put forth in terms of disrupting the power of tech incumbents. But it's interesting, right? She is trying to represent a voice that actually understands tech. So when we're legislating it, it's not just kind of these big, broad brushstrokes, dismantle them, break them up or not, but it's actually sophisticated. So she says, she basically, so this is a CoinDesk article. Basilar claims the, quote, once bright future for crypto in America has been dimming and has suffered as federal intervention pushed innovators out of our district district in the country. She's in a position to see this because San Francisco and Silicon Valley more broadly have, I think, seen for the first time probably ever with the new technology movement, some amount of an exodus of entrepreneurs freeing for either regulatory clarity or just regulatory favorability, right? She says that cryptocurrency is, quote, about building alternatives that do not exploit users and creating an ecosystem of innovation that better serves the American people. She's also raising money via cryptocurrency through Coinbase. She's raised 5,000 in Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum, Litecoin, and USD Coin. I think a couple things. One, this is obviously a long shot campaign. You have a 27-year-old challenger going up against Nancy Pelosi, who's arguably the most powerful Democrat in the country in some ways right now. The U.S., House of Representatives Speaker of the House. So I think that you got to think that on the one hand, Agatha's campaign is at least in part to get issues on Pelosi's agenda that might not have been there. But at the same time, I think that it is encouraging to see the voices of younger people getting into politics, in general, on all sides of the aisle. I think the more new blood that actually understands the nature of the world that we live in, that we're moving into, regardless of what your particular perspective is from a political standpoint, is really, really important. Two, I think it's good to see that this actual kind of, showing some meaningful understanding of what's going on in the cryptocurrency space is really positive. So again, a long shot, but certainly one worth rooting for. So check out Agatha for Congress, I think is her URL. Second, there is a new advocacy group in crypto that just launched, I think, on Monday. They're called the Aquarian Advocacy Group. They're headed up by Margot Avizadan, who has been around the crypto space since 2012. She was at Transform PR for a while. She worked with Elixir, David Chaum's company. She's done kind of a variety of things. And so their whole raison d'etre, I guess, is to stop what they call the California Bit License Bill. So this is a bill, basically it's called the California AB 1489, the CEA Act, which is modeled on the Uniform Law Commission's Uniform Regulation for Virtual Currency Businesses, aka the Model Act, which basically is a regulatory framework for cryptos. And it has to do with money transmitter licenses, right? So this is not new stuff. The Uniform Law Commission, the Model Act, is basically dates back to 2017. And so people like Coin Center were actually involved in the writing of that. And so what's going on? Why is a new advocacy group coming up when Coin Center was involved with the writing of this legislation? Well, basically, the best that I can tell is that Coin Center effectively is what their interest is trying to, they believe that the regulation of cryptocurrencies, particularly around things like money transmitter licenses, is an inevitability. And what their goal is to make sure that the right folks are regulated in that context, right? And that there's not too broad and sweeping generalizations made, right? So they want to make sure that only things like custodial exchanges are caught up in that versus a huge number of other types of actors that might be. So that's kind of as best as I can tell, that's their disposition, right? It's that, again, there's more clarity around who is actually a money transmitter, and it's not these kind of actors that shouldn't be. Aquarian, for whatever reasons or set of reasons, disagrees. They think that this bill would be too onerous, and they are fighting against it. And so what do I think? What's my take? A couple things. One is I don't know enough about this legislation to really understand what the full implications are. I share, on the one hand, Coin Center's sense that regulation is inevitable, and the more that we can properly define who should be kind of caught up in that and create safe space for everyone else, the better. At the same time, I also don't mind people fighting for the widest possible kind of interpretation of freedom and liberties, and carving out more space. So for me, I think generally speaking, it's just good to have more voices in this space, more advocacy groups. It's kind of like the free market for advocacy. Now, of course, the flip side is if you look at the DC model, advocacy can quickly become one of the most abused areas from a kind of a political, just grabbing the political bucket and grabbing all the money that's available to it. So I don't think we're there yet, though. And for now, the groups that are involved in this advocacy, I think genuinely have a pretty strong best interest of everyone involved, even when they disagree. So, congrats to Aquarian for launching, and exciting to see what happens next. And finally, number 3, let's move on to Hong Kong. So, I saw this tweet this morning from Rhythm Trader. Bitcoin volume in Hong Kong tripled this week to new all-time highs as protests experience one of its most violent days. Last month, protesters called for a run on Chinese banks, and it seems they're taking it one step further by opting out of the entire system. So what's going on in Hong Kong? Hong Kong has continued, the protests have continued. The law that was originally that provoked these protests, that would have sent as an extradition treaty, basically, that would have sent people back to China for punishment, that was put on pause. However, by then the protesters had a multi-point plan that they wanted the leadership in Hong Kong to agree to, so they've been out. They've continued to protest. These most recent protests they coincide with a national day of celebrations in Beijing to commemorate 70 years of communist rule. And at the latest one, there was a video that was released of a policeman firing his revolver at a protester. And of course, extremely heightened takes on both sides, from the protester being shot. The police claim self-defense. Protesters obviously don't have guns. So it's kind of a whole big mess. And obviously there's a world of implications here that are bigger than just Bitcoin. However, it is interesting to see this. Basically, it's local Bitcoin numbers that show the volume is the highest since kind of the 2017 boom, right? And it's like the third highest week in history of local Bitcoin's volume in Hong Kong. So for me, there's no doubt that it's interesting to take note of this, that it coincides with heightened protests and heightened the heightened challenge of the protests, right? They're kind of reaching a new level of intensity with shots fired, literally. The question for me is who, right? Who is this set of buyers? Is it just people who are generally feeling the turmoil? Is it money trying to flee amidst the turmoil? I'm just really fascinated. I would love to know more about basically, let's put it this way. We're trying to understand to what extent there's a correlation between larger political and economic actions and Bitcoin's price and its demand. And we have all these things that are interesting from a correlation standpoint, right? There seems to be a correlation between the protesters in Hong Kong and the severity of the protests in Hong Kong and the local buying volume. We can extrapolate a lot, but ultimately it is just that. It's extrapolation and it's guesswork. And I think that the more that we can understand actually what the through line is, what are the groups who are watching these protests or participating in these protests and then buying Bitcoin, because it seems substantively different to me if it is big financial interests who are just trying to get their money out of there versus the same people who are protesting who are opting out of a financial system. Those are really, really different things. Now, this is not casting kind of value judgments on either one or the other, and part of the beauty of a permissionless currency like Bitcoin is that it can be both of those things to different people and different things to different people. However, I would like to know. So if you're watching this situation, if you have stronger thoughts, if you have stronger ideas, let me know. Hit me in the comments. Hit me on Twitter. Who do you think it is that's buying Bitcoin in Hong Kong and why? All right, guys, that's my 3 at 3 for the day. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you tomorrow.